Maybe a very last thing before we leave is like, what is your take at Ukraine and Russia directly, right? Do you think we are nearing the end of the fighting stage of the conflict?
Hmm. What do you mean by near? What is your time frame for near?
Within a year. I mean, we're seeing how Russia is now gaining more and more ground, and is nearing the Dnieper, and is nearing also complete air superiority and so on. So we are nearing a point where Russia needs to make a decision. Are we going to stay in the east, or are we
Yeah.
going to go west? And I have problems seeing them actually taking decision. We're going to go all the way to Galicia, because that seems such a suicidal proposition. But I mean, how do you see it?
Within a year, if the current trends continue, I would imagine that other nations, other Ukrainian supporters will take the path of the United States. They will simply say, well, we acknowledge Daddy Trump's was right. And we see the light. And for all sorts of reasons that they will come up with, domestic as well as foreign, they will say it's clear now that there is no winning proposition for Ukraine, and we should encourage negotiations, encourage Ukraine to accept the negotiation. But nothing is going to happen except for one, a decisive military breakthrough, presumably by Russia, that threatens the heartland, now the Ukrainian heartland, the central region, Dnipropetrovsk, Kiev, and breaches the Dnieper. That would be a great psychological blow. And assuming that Russia maintained its momentum, maintained its ability to produce weapons and manpower at the rate it has to date, and Ukraine is not, then it should be obvious it will at some point dawn on even the most ardent nationalist in Ukraine that the survival of the state requires a negotiated settlement. That's missing right now. The mythology in the Ukrainian elite that wants to continue fighting is that they can create a circumstance so disastrous for either Russia or for themselves that will force the United States to become directly involved and to attack Russia. That's actually always been the hope, but it's now the last card that they can play. So, assuming that Trump is serious about giving up on Ukraine, writing it off, it seems to me that the likelihood that other European powers currently in Ukraine's camp will also eventually write off Ukraine is likely in the next year. And the logical moment for that is when new elections roll around. Because all the opposition parties to the current political elites, if they're, again, allowed to participate in the elections, the opposition in Western Europe, then if they do well, as polls indicate they will, then we will have a completely different political situation.
Yeah.
With people who have nothing, no obligation tied to Ukraine, no political commitments, and who are on record as saying they don't want to continue this fight and want to pursue peace. So I think the discussion has to shift from we're for Ukrainian victory and for Russia's defeat to the Ukrainian victory is impossible, Russia's defeat is impossible. We are therefore for what? Peace. And that is, of course, the position, I think, very correctly touted by Viktor Orban and probably Robert Fico as well, and Vucic as well. There is a third way, and that third way is not to suddenly discover neutrality, but to say that these alternative policies are no longer feasible. There is, however, a feasible, worthwhile policy, and it is to promote peace. Promoting peace, however, means fundamentally pressuring the Ukrainian political leadership into a negotiating position, to accept things that it does not want to accept, and that it will not probably, I'm speculating here, obviously, that it probably cannot accept with Zelensky at its head. Zelensky have to be somehow put aside in order to have a group of interlocutors who can then not be burdened by the legacy of the war and pursue new policies.
Yeah, I think that's the most likely outcome. The question is probably whether the Europeans and the North Americans will pretend that that new leadership is supported by them, whether they will support it or whether they will pretend that this is, take Mr. Zelensky out, have him make a government in exile to face safe, and then say whatever new regime there is illegitimate and so on, and they're collaborators with Russia in order to save face, or whether the political change in Europe is so large that they will actually say, no, this is the way forward. It's probably going to be the first one, because I don't know. I can't see how the current leadership.
It will probably be a combination of both.
Because
you can, once the political winds change, many things become possible, and there is a positive political agenda to pursue, which is the peace agenda. Meanwhile, however, moral considerations and, a certain sense of obligation to our allies in Ukraine, Zelensky and other senior officials. Well, what has happened in the past in these sorts of situations? They are evacuated and given sinecures and then quietly forgotten to the West. Yeah. And then they are,
the Vietnam scenario.
And the Shah scenario and the Afghanistan royal family scenario and endless number of scenarios. Yes.